Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Today I have the opportunity to work on a reel that I enjoy fishing with. It's not mine, it belongs to Anthony, but I enjoy the reel, and we're going to show you how to work on this one. This is the Shimano Cardiff 200A. It's a round bait casting reel, has a narrow spool and good line capacity, especially for braid. And Anthony just asked me to tune it up. He's been keeping pretty good care of his reels. This isn't the first set that I got in, but it is well cared for, and he's probably one of the people that follow the suggestion to have your reels serviced on a regular basis. And a regular basis by most manufacturers' recommendations is 1 year. 1 year, one season, 1 year, depending on how your year goes. And well, we're going to show you how to take this reel apart, how to service it, and how to keep it fishing for a long time to come. A couple of things before we get started. You know, I wear a protective glove. That's to keep the greases and oils off my non-working hand. I use a parts tray. That's where that little tie-down screw just went. And I like to take pictures along the way. Well, I also like to suggest to you that you subscribe to my channel if you like to see fishing reels repaired, if you like to learn how to do it yourself. If you want to keep your reels in good working order, then this is a good channel for you. I try to teach folks how to do it themselves so that, well, the reels get a second chance. As I take apart the exterior pieces, we took off the handle, and that included the nut cap and the tie-down bar. And I'll do one more piece here. There's a little tension spring that goes on top of the star adjuster. This one's on a little tight. Looks like it's gotten bent down. This goes between the handle and the adjuster itself. Well, we're just going to walk it up. And I will remove the star adjuster by turning that in a counterclockwise manner, and then we can pull that off. It's a good place to take pictures because, well, there's little washers and things under here. You want to know what the orientations of those washers are. Those are two spring washers or tension washers, and then there's a flat, smaller washer here. And we're going to leave that on there as we take off the side plate. These reels are, well, they're comparable to the Ambassadors. Some think they're better. Some have no idea what's going on the inside of either one of them, so they just like the way that it goes. I like the small format to the spools. I like the narrow channel ones. And one of the things you'll notice with this that doesn't happen with the Ambassador is this is driven from the gear side. So when you go to cast, this line guide will not move in casting mode. If you have a reel like that, what you want to do is you want to center that line guide before you cast. Because if you have it over to the one side or the other, the line on the opposite side, the line over here, trying to make it through there to go out, is going to drag. It's going to create more friction. You're going to have less of a cast. So if you bring it to the center, well, everything travels kind of equally, and you have less friction going out on your cast. I like the Shimanos that do this. Not all round bait casters do that. As I mentioned, the Ambassadors and a lot of other reels are driven from the other side, so the line guide is going to move as you throw your line out. All right, there's 3 screws that hold that side plate on. I think we can remove that at this point. We can. I'm going to remove the spool right now. And one of the things I like to do with those spools is put a rubber band on them. I like to recommend that if it's an annual service, that at the time you're sending it in for service, you remove the line because, well, line goes bad. And a lot of people try to fish line for too long, and then they lose fish because, well, the line that they were counting on got UV damage, or it got stretched, or it got somehow other braid tends to fray, but it gets weakened. And if it gets weakened, well, the problem that you have with that is that it's going to break off below the recommended line test, and that's going to cause problems. All right, I just oiled the bearing in the spool. There'll be another bearing on the back side here. And because the line guide is driven from the opposite side, you can see the line guide worm gear here. You don't need to do anything in terms of taking the other side plate cover off unless, well, you really want to. While it's open, clean the inside of the case. There's just a little bit of dirt in here. This is the ideal time to do it because you can't reach these posts. And inside the case, once that's set off. Okay, I'm going to just oil the worm gear while I'm at it. Reinstall the spool into that cavity there. Set that in. And then the last thing I'm going to want to do is just put a little bit of grease onto the spool shaft so that when we service that line guide, that gear side, we'll be all set. Take a picture here. Notice a couple of things. One of the things you want to notice is that trip mechanism for the free spool. I always like to set that in a down position when I go to work on these wheels because it's important in terms of resetting the thumb bar. I've had a lot of folks tell me, well, I've worked on my reel and now my free spool release bar doesn't work. Well, it's because they didn't set that in a down position when they went to set up the thumb bar side plate reattachment, and well, it cost them. All right, here's that other washer we were talking about. There's actually two small shim washers, so I'm going to put them in my parts tray right next to the other one. This one has an instant anti-reverse clutch in it, so you don't need to do anything with that clutch other than clean it. Don't grease it. Those are friction driven. There's also a bearing in the back side here of the side case. That's where the spool is going to anchor, so make sure you oil that as well. And I choose to oil my bearings, not to grease them. All right, there's a bearing that came off of the shaft. This is the clutch piece, the inner tube. And then there's two small springs here. I don't call them screws all the time. Get those springs and put them in your parts tray right away so that you don't lose them. Next up then, we will remove the main gear assembly and the click ratchet. Notice you have a backup traditional anti-reverse fork dog here. That's a fail-safe. If you're fighting a big fish, that'll enable you to work without really destroying the anti-reverse clutch. And then we have one more bearing, I believe. It may or may not be a bearing. It'll be sitting under this. You can remove that if you're finding that it's tight. It might even be a bushing. I'm not even sure. I probably should have checked the schematic. I just choose to put the oil in on the back side. It'll work its way through, and we'll make certain that it keeps lubricated for the gear shaft. Well, you don't need to remove your click mechanism unless you're having an issue with it. But if you were to remove it, there's two screws that are holding the primary piece on. This is very clean, as I mentioned. Anthony takes care of his stuff. You don't need to remove that if it's clean. What I like to do is run a bead of oil behind it and under it where it's going to roll. And then just make sure it works. Test it. Bring it in. It's going to flow down. And then bring it back. You can pop it up if you like. And just make sure it's working the way it should. This is a Teflon washer. I do not choose to lubricate the Teflon washers with grease. I prefer oils, and that's because you don't really need to do much with the Teflon, because the Teflon washers are by nature plastic, and plastic is self-lubricating. Okay, I'm going to grab the, let's do this one first then. We have the pinion gear. Check the pinion gear, make sure that the teeth are nice and uniform. Clear. Here's your yoke. And a lot of folks get this one backwards, so just pay attention. When you're looking for the yoke, you're going to find that there's two slots that serve as ramps. They're on this side. That's the back side of the yoke. The slotted side of the pinion gear faces in, and both of these just slide down now into the assembly. That's it. We might take our click ratchet next. Insert the forked AR dog. Again, this is secondary. You split the fork one side on each of the click ratchet. The click ratchet has got a rectangle in it, so as you're coming down, set the rectangle and then rotate your click ratchet and center it over the post. So that's how that one will sit. All right, the only thing left then is really just servicing the main gear. There's a washer that goes on the post next. That's between the main gear and that click ratchet. So this one's a relatively simple design, but very effective. I'm just going to knock out that. We only have a single drag washer here. That kind of tells you a little bit about where the reel is intended to fish and the type of fishing that you would expect to do. This one's a hard washer. We can put a little bit of grease on there just because I'm a little bit uncertain exactly what it's made of. I'm going to dip it in some grease. I'm going to rub it between my fingers. And then I kind of get it right after all these years, but if it was really loaded with grease, then wipe off the excess. Just leave a small sheen on it. Last thing I want to do before we reassemble this then is to take our main gear and clear the channels in the teeth and inspect the teeth while we're doing it. Just like we looked at the pinion gear, we want to do the same thing for the main gear here. Again, we cleaned off the back. There was some old greases that were laying there. We've got tarnish on the inside of this, but not dirt. You want to take the main gear's drag washer then, seat it in after we've done the greasing. We'll come back and do some grease, and use fishing reel grease, please, when you're doing this. I'm using Penn's Precision Reel Grease. That's the blue grease. Yeah, it's a Shimano product. Doesn't matter. It's a fishing reel grease. If you want to go find Shimano grease, go ahead and do that. Actually, I have a container of it here somewhere, but this is convenient, and I don't see much difference between the greases, so I don't do that. Actually, here's my Shimano grease here, so I guess if I was prepared a little bit more, maybe I would have done that, but that's okay. All right, we got the washer that goes on the top. Next up then would be the stud for the anti-reverse, the collar. Make sure that this is grease-free. Again, the anti-reverse clutch is a friction-driven device, so grease is going to compromise its effectiveness. There are two prongs on the bottom of the clutch shield, or whatever we want to call this core. Make sure that you get those into the hole of the last metal drag washer, the only metal drag washer, and that it's flush against the seam there. With that done, we've cleaned the case, we've oiled the bearing. We can go ahead and put the case back on then. Sometimes when you're going to put this back on, these screws get in the way. There's little channels for the screws. If you're having a hard time putting that back on, check those first. There's two screws that we took out that are going to hold that metal plate. So you want to get those and put those back in. And you want to make sure you have a nice seal to them. If you see that those two places for the screws are not lining up, if their case is not in good condition, if it's rocking or something like that, take your time and go back and reset it again. As I mentioned, sometimes those screws get in the way and they create an out of balance situation. All right, I just used a little scrubby pad with some rod and reel cleaner on it to shine this up. Again, Anthony's done a nice job here with that. But if you're taking the time to service your reel, take your time to make sure you do a nice job cleaning it. The cleaner I'm using is a rod and reel cleaner by Penn. Here's that last bearing that goes in the top here. It could have come in from underneath. I'm going to put some oil on that, but I'm going to be careful with the oil on that because the anti-reverse clutch is right under there. So don't swamp it with oil. We had the shim washers go next. Then we had those 2 tension washers, and I noticed I made an error. So let's go back. Did you pick up the error I made? This is where the pictures, and this is where the parts trays help. We'll give you an opportunity to kind of think about where that error was. Yep, those of you that saw it, those of you that know, the little springs for the yoke were not put on place. So let's just go ahead and do that. No harm, no foul. All right, there is a bearing shield that goes on top of that post, and we have our case back on now. And once again, I managed to knock the bearing out. That's okay. Center your case. Make sure that you're lined up again with those 2 cavities for the screws. Here goes one, then the other. Then we noted you have a little bearing washer on the back, and the bearing. Make sure that seat's flush inside. Then you have the 2 smaller bearing washers that were going on the top. Then we have the bent washers. Don't flatten them out. They don't belong flattened out. They're tension washers. They control the sensitivity of the star adjuster. I like to put the first one belly up and the second one belly down. And then we can put our star adjuster on. So you can see it doesn't take long to do a reel like this. So why put it off? When it's time to put the rod aside and take the reel off for the winter time or whenever your season is off, that's the time to go service your reel, because that way you don't miss the spring runs. However, if you're using the reel a lot and you want to just make sure that you have continued good performance of it, maybe you want to do it at mid-season. Regardless of how you do it, you should do it, and it doesn't take that long to do. All right, as I mentioned, when we go to set the side plate now, we want to pull down to put this in cast mode. When we go to set this, we want to bring this bar, you can see the stud on that, we want to raise that all the way up. That way you're assured that you have the right clearance for the mechanism so that you don't jam it up. Next then, we want to just make sure that we have a nice tight seal on the case. Let's go ahead and bring the adjuster screws in. Tighten them up. Just wanted to turn that handle and make sure that I had meshed the line guide drive gear and the drive off of the main side here. All right, we can give it a test. We're a little tight, but we're a little tight because we just put grease and oils in there. That'll loosen up in a moment. Let's take our handle, nut cap, tighten the nut cap down, and generally if you can get a point of the nut cap to point right to the hole for that tie down clip, You should be very close, if not right on, in terms of the alignment of the hole in the tie-down cap with the hole in the handle, and we're right on there. And then we can take this screw, tighten that down, tighten down the drag washer, we notice it's singular, and give it a test. Make sure that your free spool is releasing. Nicely done. And if you find that it's a tight spool, you can adjust both ways. You can adjust inward if you want more tension on it. You can adjust backwards if you want more free spooling and casting. And you also have the adjustment inside on the casting brake. So on that spool there's about 6 brakes. You can pull them out or pull them in to help with the casting and your expectation in terms of how to make it work. Well, there you go. Beautiful reel. And Anthony, thank you for sending that one in. This is the Cardiff. It's the 200A. It's the Shimano reel. And I guess the only thing you might want to do, you can put a little bit of oil into those two sides of the line guides so that it glides a little bit easier along the metal frame. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed it. To our first responders and essential personnel, thank you for everything it is that you do. Your efforts are appreciated. To everyone, please stay safe, stay well, stay watching, enjoy the videos on how to service the reels, and more importantly, try to service your reels yourself. That's kind of what the channel is about. Make sure that the reels get a second chance. Good luck fishing to all. Have a great day. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.